And looks like our first speaker is ready. Yuri, great to see you, man.
Hi everyone. Good to see you
So
too.
Yuri, I'm going to give you a quick. I'm gonna pump you up just a second. So if anybody's not familiar with Uri and his work in the ecosystem, just Google the guild and GraphQL, and you're going to figure out just a little bit of what it is that Uri and his team of merry makers have actually contributed to the ecosystem. Really great having you here. You came also in at a last minute to pinch hit here, so really appreciate that as well. And without any further ado, I'm going to let you go ahead and just take the stage and bring us what you got.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. It's good to see you, and thanks for having me. I hope you can see my screen now. Yeah, so wait, let me close it and just make sure everything is okay. So I'm not talking to myself. Yeah, I guess everything is okay. So yeah, so again, thanks Jesse for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And great introduction to GraphQL. Thank you for that. And arranging everything here. So today I'm going to talk about some kind of a paradigm shift that we are that is happening today in the GraphQL ecosystem, based on a new way of building GraphQL servers. I'll talk a bit about myself and who I am. I'm a member and a founder of a group called the Guild. We're um, building and maintaining probably the most popular GraphQL tools out there. Some of them are listed here. The more famous ones are, and they're all basically connected as a platform. I'll go through a couple of them. One, probably the most famous ones or the most used one is the GraphQL code generator, which lets you. It's kind of like similar to the Swagger code gen, but because of the GraphQL capabilities, is a bit more powerful because you can generate types for the backend, but also you can generate SDKs according to the queries that the front end is making. So this is kind of like a generator for generators. So you have different plugins for different languages. It's a very powerful library. GraphQL tools that lets
Here,
you.
we
Yeah.
don't see your slides just yet.
Oh, you don't see my slides? Oh. That's weird.
I see your mouse.
Really? Wait, let me show it again. Just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, entire screen. Can you see my slides now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let me go back. Okay, good. So yeah, so as I said, this is just the link for our website if someone wants to actually check out the guild. Or just Google the guild GraphQL, like Jesse said. That will be probably the best option. Yeah, you can see here a couple of different tools. I hope you can see it now that we maintain. Like the GraphQL code generator I mentioned a bit, GraphQL tools, which gives you a whole set of different tools that you need in order to develop GraphQL. It also includes schema stitching, which is a way to federate your different GraphQL services. Maybe in the questions, if someone cares, I can talk a bit about like the different ways of federating your services, and I think there's a lot to talk there. That could be cool. GraphQL Mesh is a library. It's a very interesting library. It's a library where you can take basically any existing source. Like let's say you have existing REST APIs. Maybe they have Swagger definitions or Open API, maybe gRPC, maybe SOAP, and it would actually generate GraphQL APIs out of it. So that's really cool. But then the next phase is actually you could, once it is generated, you could actually use that generated artifacts and have just a ready-made gateway that basically sits in front of all your data sources automatically, or it could even be generated into an SDK that could run basically distributedly on every service. So it's a really cool library that I really like personally. GraphQL inspector that runs on your CI and makes sure you don't make breaking changes with GraphQL. GraphQL modules, where if you have a lot of teams that needs to collaborate on a single GraphQL endpoint, it really helps there. And many more. And the philosophy around the guild and why we create these tools is that we didn't set out to build so many tools that basically spans across the client and the backend and like developer toolings inside your IDE. We didn't set up to do all these things, but we just wanted to contribute where things were missing. And slowly and gradually, we just did more and more because we saw there was a need. So we always try to first contribute things back into existing libraries, use existing libraries that are not maintained by us. But then if we see that that like the developers or the maintainers are not there, or it's just missing, the idea is not there, and we need it for our actual clients, only then we open source. So when you see a library that we open source, you can be sure that this is something that's first of all going to be maintained for the long term. This is a very important thing. And also that it came out of a necessity and not out of anything else, not out of selling you another product or anything like that. And I think it makes our lives as maintainers easierly. And it shows, I think, on all the libraries we maintain, that we maintain for many, many years now. Now, in the last year or year and a half, we started seeing similar needs or similar gaps in the backend ecosystem, in the server ecosystem. And we had a couple of things we started. We needed more complex use cases for our clients. We work with like many like Fortune 500 companies, and as you go into production and as you scale, you get less of basic use cases, and you start to see that the server ecosystem, some of the frameworks there, we saw there were gaps of the things we wanted to do. So first thing, we tried to contribute into the existing servers that we were using. But then when we saw that they're not responsive and they basically, for all kinds of reasons, they couldn't accept our contributions, we actually developed a new library that I'm going to talk about it today. So today I want to actually go through our mindset when we started actually thinking about the idea of developing Envelope. You could go, by the way, to envelope.dev. That's the website of the library. You can also get there from the Guild's library and start checking it out. So going back to when we actually started this, we asked ourselves, what do we actually want from a GraphQL server? And it sounds like an easy question, but I'm not sure it's that basic. So here I'm going to just, this is a short slide I use for many of my talks. We can see a client queries a query from a GraphQL server. The GraphQL server goes and fetches the data from an old API, maybe from multiple data sources, and then at the end, when everything is orchestrated, it sends back the result that we want. That's kind of like, the very basic of what GraphQL is doing for us in a very high level way. But if we go deeper a bit, and we look actually at the reference implementation at GraphQL.js, it's the reference implementation of GraphQL. It actually exposes 4 functions for us: parse, validate, execute, and subscribe. So it's basically just a function. What is that function does? Like what you can see here is basically, I'm going to go very quickly around what is the execute function actually does, which is the actual core of GraphQL, what GraphQL.js is giving us, let's say, or any basic GraphQL implementation. And Jesse mentioned it a bit. So that function actually takes our schemas and resolvers, the executable schema, how we create like the planned server that we created, and then it gets a query. And really think about it just as a function that takes two parameters, executable schema and a query. And then everything you're going to see now in the slide is what the function is doing internally. So that function is going to take one resolver, execute it, and get the result. Then it's going to bring the two boxes, name and messages, because that's what we want from the query, and it's going to execute them in parallel. And when the right results are ready, it's going to put them in the right place. But then messages, we're actually going to get 3 messages. So GraphQL would take those 3 messages, would then execute all the data, the title boxes for each of those, orchestrate and wait for all the results to come back, and then at the end give us the right result and send it back. So that's the core of GraphQL, and that is just a function. So if that's what GraphQL JS or like the core function of GraphQL is actually giving us, what else do we want from a server, right? Like maybe that's all we need. We just need that, like the orchestration and calling the endpoints and everything. What else do we need from a server? Now, remember that this is, if we actually look at it as just a function, this function doesn't care actually about the network layer at all, right? Like you could run that function on the client, you can run that function on the backend, you can run, it's actually doesn't really care about where it sits. So when we go to the server, that means that we actually going to put that function in a certain place, and we're going to need certain things in that environment, on that server environment, on top of these functions. So what do we want? So in my opinion, what we want on top of GraphQL, the basic function, is we want an easy way to create our schema. There's many ways of doing it. I mentioned GraphQL tools. It means that you can write the actual SDL, the actual GraphQL language, in order to create the schema. There's also many code-first tools out there as well. If some of you have questions around it, what to choose, we at the Guild actually started being more active in that space and like looking at the best solutions there. So that's one thing that the server is doing. The other thing is communication handling. So we have a server, right? So we need to basically get that query from somewhere over the network. Maybe it's just a regular HTTP. Maybe we need some kind of like transport that is bidirectional because we want to push, like with GraphQL subscriptions and with live queries, maybe we want to push something over the network as well to push things. So maybe WebSocket, maybe server-side events, HTTP2 and things like that. And maybe we're actually on a serverless environment. Maybe we're actually at the edge. Like let's say we want to deploy to Cloudflare workers, which is a very interesting place to want to deploy. Maybe we need also handling of that part as well. Also from a server, if it needs to be a gateway, we want good way to perform caching and check for performance, trace everything that's happening, powerful logging. We need powerful ways to do security and auth, and also a very clear and comfortable way to do error handling. And also we want kind of like a whole ecosystem around our server, because we want like the whole community to be part of our issues. We don't want to be depending on one company or only on ourselves with all these issues that would rise up as we go into production. So the next slide is very opinionated. It's kind of like my opinion, and I would love people to debate me on that. But that's what I see as the GraphQL server landscape before we introduced ENVELOP. So there's all kinds of frameworks out there that are, or the most popular ones, and that they give you kind of like a batteries included server and everything. And our personal opinion, or at least our experience, was that we really tried to do all kinds of things with these frameworks when we went into more advanced use cases. And those frameworks were a bit too opinionated. So, all kinds of custom things we needed to do, we just couldn't, or it was very, very hard. Also, then it was very hard to share it with the community because it was kind of like a hack. And also some of them were actually not so well maintained. So if you take some choices and you encapsulate a lot of dependencies in your framework, but then you don't maintain it, then very quickly all those dependencies and those choices becomes out of date, and then your users can't opt out and update those themselves. So it becomes a problem. Also, those frameworks took opinion about, how do you use HTTP, or should you use SDL first or code first? And the issue there is that once you take that opinion, it means you, or at least with these frameworks, then you can't share solutions like caching, like logging, like security configurations between different parts of the ecosystem. You shouldn't. So if someone has a code first using one code first solution, and another person uses another code first solution, they actually can't share solutions around security, even though it shouldn't matter. Also, a big part of the problem, I think, today is that frameworks actually wrap the entire HTTP request pipeline. And the issue there is that we want to deploy our servers into more and more interesting places. It's not only anymore just like a regular server. We maybe want to use AWS Lambda, Azure Functions, and maybe even the edge like Cloudflare Workers. And there we need more flexibility, and maybe use Dino, for example. So we need there more and more. We need a better way more flexible way to handle the actual communication layer and the request pipeline. And those frameworks weren't flexible enough for us. And some of them do give us some kind of a bit of adjustments, but it's just too little and very hard to maintain. And I think also some of the parts here is that maybe some of those frameworks actually want you to use certain solutions. They don't want to be completely open, because they want you to, at the end of the day, to use some of their paid solutions, let's say. So it's easier for them to put you into a certain box and make it harder for you to move. And for us, it was just because of the nature of our clients, which are very big and they have very high demands. It was just we had to come up with a better solution. So we went back to the drawing board, and what you see here is basically the actual drawing that we made in the meeting when we actually worked on ENVELOP. And I'm going to reverse engineer our thought process. So I was talking about GraphQL and the basic functions of it: parse, validate, execute, and subscribe. So parse is like getting the query and actually the string of the query, and then parsing it into something that GraphQL could work with. Validate is like validating that this query is actually legal and is okay. And then we execute it, and subscribe is to subscribe to events for push events, if you know. So what we thought was maybe we could actually hook before and after each phase and have the full power of changing everything before of these phases, but then still expose the same API outside. So, and those hooks could be basically available for plugin developers. So plugin developers could have a lot of power changing almost everything across the system, the execution of GraphQL, but outside the API is the same. And you could also plug in your schema in the easiest way you want. So you can plug in code first schemas, SDL first schemas, and also federation schemas like Apollo Federation or schema stitching. So it doesn't matter how you create your schema and how you execute it, you can plug it in, and then plugin developers could use that. And another important thing is that this leaves all the request and pipeline out of that framework, out of that tool. So now to handle this, you can use the tools that you're using anyway to do that. So it shouldn't matter for GraphQL how you are handling this, and that gives you a lot of flexibility. And I'll show you later why it's important. So that's how we ended up with ENVELOP, which is basically the new GraphQL plugin system. So now that we have it and we're using it for over a year in production, and many people are actually onboarding on this, what did we get? So first most important thing I think is that we made a lot of hard GraphQL capabilities easy. There's a lot of talks about how to do security in GraphQL, how to do monitoring and tracing in GraphQL. They're always like sound very smart conversations, very smart talks, and it's always like sounds very fancy. We just thought, why isn't it very easy to do this? Because they're basically repeating themselves. So now with Envelope, you can just get a plugin, and that plugin will do all the fancy and the hard work internally because it has access to the internals of GraphQL, something no framework has done before. But for the developer, it's as easy as just adding one line. So here you could see like that with 4 lines of code and basically 4 plugins, we created here a basic server that is way more performant than any server out there before, because we use very powerful caching for the parsing phase. We use very powerful caching for the validation phase, and we use GraphQL JIT that really optimizes the GraphQL execution. And we didn't need to be GraphQL experts for that. We just needed to install some plugins. And for the plugin developers, the API is extremely powerful and they can do so much. And now those plugin developers could actually expose the plugins in the plugin hub. So that's a really, really cool thing. So the whole community could enjoy these solutions together. And the whole ecosystem could grow together, and it doesn't matter, your choices of where do you deploy your server and which way you're using to build your schemas and everything. We can all use the same plugins. And again, we could deploy this anywhere, like even in Cloudflare Workers on Edge, which is something we do and we highly recommend. And also in terms of schemas, we can even take Apollo Federation, and instead of running it in Apollo Gateway, which is a kind of like a closed framework, you could actually take the Apollo Federation that you have today with Apollo Gateway and just drop in, replace this with Envelope. So you get Apollo Federation execution from their own code together with all the plugins that we just created. So you basically get a better gateway. The third thing that we created, that we got when we created Envelope, was this is also a low-level framework. So it's basically a framework of frameworks. So what started happening is that actually other frameworks in the ecosystem started using this as a base for their own frameworks, high-level frameworks. So for example, one example is Redwood.js is a very exciting framework that I highly recommend you to look at. It's a full stack framework, and they basically makes it's a batteries included. They make everything easy for you when you create full stack GraphQL applications. And they used to basically wrap Apollo server before. And then they collaborated with us, talked with us, and they really wanted to try Envelope. We helped them integrate that. And at the beginning, they released a version for the community that exposed GraphQL, Apollo server and Envelope together. Basically, a month passed, and they just said there's no reason for them to use Apollo server. They completely deprecated it, and everything in Redwood.js today runs on Envelope. They're very happy with it, and they're basically are at the 1.0 RC right now. So it's just one example of how powerful Envelope could be for other frameworks. Also, internally in your company, you could basically create presets of the right plugins. Like, let's say you have a certain way of doing tracing in your company, or a certain way you do security configurations in your company. You can now build a base envelope and share it across all your company. Like one example that was recently published is that Klarna Bank actually moved all their GraphQL servers into Envelope and started sharing presets like that across the whole company. So yeah, that's just one case that we see, and there's many more stories of that I hope I can share soon. So, and the last thing that I wanted to say that we got when we introduced Envelope was something really, really cool. We call it Babel for GraphQL. So if you know from the JavaScript ecosystem, JavaScript had a lot of new features with the years that we all use and we all love. But some browsers weren't ready to basically get introduced to it. They weren't support. They didn't support these features. But so Babel came and basically let us use new features and even features that are not in the spec with JavaScript and compile it down into each browser that it will work anywhere. With Envelope, because we're hooking into the system, we actually are doing the same. So now we can have, if you're using Envelope, you could use all kinds of new features in GraphQL, like defer and stream, live queries, one-off directives, all kinds of very powerful tools and capabilities of GraphQL that are still in process getting into the spec and getting into the reference implementation. But we already use that for many, many months now, and we're really happy with the results. And now we're basically on par with everything Facebook is doing internally, because Facebook is actually using defer and stream and live queries for years now. So now we could use all these things also in our own ecosystem and outside of Facebook. So to check out more around Envelope, you can head over to our website, try it out. Like I said, there's a whole marketplace of plugins that are really, really cool. And yeah, I think you should really check it out. And one more thing that I want to announce today is that many years ago, there was a very popular framework called GraphQL Yoga. It was a higher level framework that set out to make it very, very easy to start a GraphQL server. It was written by Prisma, and it was really cool and very loved and very popular. Prisma stopped maintaining it for a couple of years now, but they were very nice, and we talked with them, and they actually gave us transferred us the maintainership of GraphQL Yoga. And I can say today that today we have the first alpha version out for GraphQL Yoga, built on top of Envelope. And we want the community to also try that out and give us feedback, because we think the community deserves a framework that is not only batteries included, but also well maintained. So just to summarize very quickly, we think that the GraphQL ecosystem deserved a better server ecosystem for servers that when you actually go into production and you actually need to be more sophisticated. And you also want that server to be modern, and you want it to be open, so you could use the power of the community and the ecosystem to not repeat yourself all the time when you want to just make your server secure. Usually it's just with Envelope, it's just a matter of a couple of plugins. It's not so hard. And the most important thing is that we want something that you could rely on, like every one of our libraries that are just kept constantly maintained for many, many years now. We think that the server should be the same. So now I'm really happy that we have Envelope and GraphQL Yoga, and now hopefully the ecosystem has a better way to create and develop fast and reliable and secure GraphQL servers. So thanks. I hope I still have time for questions. And anyway, if you want to follow me or talk to me and reach out directly, I'm Uri Go everywhere. You can go to GitHub and find all the links there. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, we do have time for questions.
Oh, good. Great.
So
I wasn't sure how I was with time.
No worries. So in the community, in the chat, definitely start piling up your questions. I'm going to get through a couple of my questions first, because I'm the MC, so I get to do that. Yeah. But so like GraphQL Yoga, that's actually big news. Everybody really, really, really loved that library, and we kind of wish that certain companies had kept it maintained. That's great though that they handed it over, and that's kind of been the MO of the guild, right? Is when there's a library that had something right, and then it was going well, and maybe the company didn't have the resources internally or whatever else to keep going there, or they pivoted or whatever, then that was where oftentimes the guild would come in and say, hey, we can help you with that, make it better, get it, community supported and everything. And that's been a lot of the process for many things, right?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, the goal when we set up to build the guild was to build some kind of a different organization. I mean, now people are starting to see the effects of it, but at the beginning, people didn't really understand, I think. But now, people see that the way we structure ourselves means that we can have the resource for the long term and stay there. And you see that, like, building an open source library and having a good idea is important, and it pushes the whole community forward. And when you do it in an open source way, that's great because people can see what you're doing and can learn from it and use it, of course. But actually maintaining something for the long term is very hard. You need the right types of incentives, and you need the right types of people, and you need and just being there, just sometimes doing stuff actually slower. Like the guild was always like, I see it as like something that progresses very, very slow, but once it's there, it's there. And I think in many in the current technology environment, everyone is moving super fast. Everyone is like always stressed to get the next big thing. When you're doing something slow, you also have the opportunity to do it well. And I think that was something. So I don't think it's like better than the other things. I think it's just something that was missing, right? Like you have the companies that move really fast and they have really cool stuff. So there was just something missing there, and we hope that we could like fill in the gap. And I think here really to say to Prisma was very, very nice in actually doing that, right? There's a lot I can say about other libraries that we also wanted to take over and or help maintain, even just join as maintainers, and other people didn't do it even though they're unmaintained. So I think this is very nice from Prisma, and it's not only the only library we took from them. Like now everyone knows GraphQL config and many it's like GraphQL import and many libraries that we took from them. So they were really, really nice to do that. I think it says a lot about them as well.
Yeah, that does, and that's a very encouraging thing to see. Because I was going to say, you're talking about. It was one of my questions was like with Envelope, for example, and it's a little bit interesting too because you're talking about maintaining a sort of a tool chain and a library set and having the right incentives. Because the guild's monetization model, as far as I understand, you guys are to pay the bills. You're like consultants, right? So you can help companies figure out how to implement the stuff in the right way. So you have the practitioner and the preacher mixture where you're able to sort of inform what should exist in the ecosystem based off of real world experience, which is, I think, a powerful combination. And you're not just saying we're going to build our own tool chain, keep it to ourselves, and sorry, it's like you're just going to say, hey, we know that we need a better hammer, and so you make a better hammer and make it the plans open source, and then give everybody like better hammers. So
exactly. Like like because when you work with actual, so some people would say, oh, why are you working with clients? Like you can move faster without it. But I think when you do work with clients, and we also not only just come and consult, like that's, by the way, we do for free. We just have free meetings with basically anyone who wants just to talk about their architecture and what to do. We just do it for free. It's very fun. We're learning from it as much as everyone else. But then with our own clients, we actually do hands-on work. Now, if we just came up with just random open source libraries that are just good ideas and we're not using them with the clients, it just adds extra work for us. So we're not doing that. So we're actually, because of this structure, we only build libraries that actually help us with our own work. Otherwise, we wouldn't structure it. And it's a bit similar to the philosophy of Facebook, how they open source things, right? Like Facebook says very clearly, we open source just the things that we care in, that we actually use in production. So, and you can see that it actually works very well, and their libraries are very high quality. So I think it's a bit similar to that, but it's still more flexible than, let's say, the Facebook model, because you do have number of clients and you do have the community. So it's like a bit of both worlds, right? Like you both a bit more flexible, but also you have this, like, this is a real problem that actually is worked
The
on in
Facebook
production.
model is challenging too, right? Because you get a lot of cases, you've got a couple of the thought leadership around a specific technology that either they're going to work there forever and be paid to maintain this open source library, or when they move on to other things, which like people are allowed to do. It becomes maybe this technology, this spec needed a bit more consistent shaping and forming. And I think GraphQL had a risk point there for a little bit. And I think moving to Linux Foundation was really helpful. And I actually think having community-driven organization also outside of Linux Foundation does help in a degree, because there's a little bit of there's a safety mechanism there for the community to say, okay, we have a fallback. That these people are still pushing it, and so we know that there's still like something happening. And then on the other side, it's also kind of a little bit of they support you, you support them. There's kind of a bit of a informing of each other's work, which is pretty great. But I have to ask, because I'm now in my second SaaS as a GraphQL provider. So envelope, like on the envelope, looks like it would be a risk for GraphQL SaaS companies, because somebody could potentially just build a library that drops in X service, right? And then it becomes this is like a well-maintained plugin that does what my business proposition was. What would be like your argument? Yeah, what would be your argument to, or encouragement to a SaaS founder, maybe just starting out or whatever? Like, let's say file storage, because I saw that you're supporting file uploads with GraphQL Yoga, which is fantastic, because that's a notoriously hard problem in GraphQL. There's no binary support in the spec. And so somebody creates the plugin for file uploads with envelope, as I suppose you have here, because it's not based on envelope. But they want to make that as their SaaS business. How would you encourage them and say, actually, like, this is why you still can, or here's where you could add value on top of the core plugin architecture that envelope provides?
It's a great question, actually. I mean, another, by the way, example is caching, right? Like there's now suddenly it's like extremely easy with envelope to set up caching and even set it up on the edge, right? You can take a envelope, deploy it on edge, and then set up your caching on edge, and you get like very powerful GraphQL caching on edge for free. So it's a good question. I think our goal wasn't necessarily to support SaaS companies, but more to support developers in general and the GraphQL ecosystem. But I think that if you look at the big picture, I think that what we are doing here is just making it way easier to get to GraphQL into production. And I think that's where, and I think that will actually has the potential to increase the whole ecosystem by a lot, because what I see constantly on the web is like all kinds of articles about GraphQL is hard. GraphQL, it's very hard to secure GraphQL. All kinds of it's very hard to cache GraphQL, and all these things give GraphQL, I think, a bad rep. And now that we have very easy solutions for that, I think overall the whole community will grow. And SaaS solutions are always needed. It doesn't matter how easy it is to build something yourself. Many people would always just opt out for a SaaS solution. So I think everyone is winning. Both, it's much easier to probably build your SaaS now because you can actually build it using Envelope, and also you get the whole ecosystem to just move forward in an easier way. For me, part of the cool thing about this plugin hub is that I just, I like you, both of us have been talking about GraphQL for many years and been into many conferences, and sometimes it sounds like some talks are repeating themselves, which is okay, but and those are very interesting talks, but something in myself felt like, should we have solved this already? Like, shouldn't we move to the next talks in the next year? And I think that's actually progressing everyone. So I think when we have a baseline like that, people could actually start, like you said, it's a good idea. I never thought about it. Like, build a SaaS plugin. That's really cool. That's a really cool idea. Like, just as an example, on the tracing plugins, we have like Sentry, Datadog, Apollo tracing support. So it's like part of it might make it much easier for the SaaS product to integrate into an existing server just by creating a plugin. That's a really good idea. I love this.
Well, even in terms of federation, right? Because if you've got the idea, so Apollo's federation concept followed. This is mostly for the audience, because and to be fair, we've been both talking about GraphQL for a long time, but I have been talking about your work with GraphQL for a long time, as opposed to So that's kind of where the similarity ends there. But the Apollo approach to federation is they would annotate the external service, right? So you'd have to say this is basically essentially a foreign key relationship identification in Apollo. You say, I'm controlling this schema and I'm controlling this schema, and I've got these two things. But now if you have essentially envelopes as the core concept, you could kind of say, well, go ahead and add this envelope or this plugin that would be sort of our SaaS certainly plugin to connect with this thing. So forwarding headers, permissions, controls. I know Zura, one of our big things is we have really fine-grained RBAC controls, and people want that. Like, how do you make a plugin to be able to connect with that? So that's a really interesting approach. I think one of the things where any of the big SaaS companies kind of know that one of the huge areas where you make money is on the SLA, because at the end of the day, if your prod's down, you don't necessarily want to make a GitHub issue.
I think you're very right. I never thought about it, actually. I think it's a great idea, and I think there's Zura is doing also amazing work here, and I think as the ecosystem, what we try to do basically is to break these issues into the smaller pieces possible, because then everyone could offer solutions and it will all fit in together. So I think, and for us, and it starts from, for us, we didn't plan all this like huge thing. It started just from like us having a number of different clients, and we just saw that we're repeating ourselves even within our own paid customers. And just by introducing ENVELOP and introducing some plugins, like the initial plugins before the community jumped in, it just saved so many lines of code, repeated code in each client that we had. Also for let's say dev shops and all kinds of people who support GraphQL, or let's say infrastructure teams inside big companies, this is a huge win, because now you could much more easily handle many people coming to you and asking you for support or how to do something. And your point for SaaS companies to do that, I think it's a really good point. I think it's actually would actually open the doors for a lot of these solutions to make it so much easier to integrate and to offer their solutions for people.
I think it could be really interesting. I think an area too where GraphQL is got a lot of room to develop, or in terms of open source or publicly exposed GraphQL APIs, because this is the risk, right? Figuring out how do we lock this down adequately, because when you're that low level at the bottom of the tooling, you can actually also start to do things like estimating query size. You can do things like being able to start charging based on number of fields in a more predictable way. So there's a lot of opportunity using when you're able to access that low level. So maybe for SaaS companies too, it's kind of how do I think about my
Yeah.
service as a plugin for somebody else's system, and how would I monetize that, or how would I be able to provide a value add there that plugin plus SLA is able to work, and not just be able to tell the customer that it was somebody else's plugin that broke your build. But
I hope that most SaaS companies will think like you. I think this is definitely more of the approach that we want to take, and to
there was
have
some stone
everyone
throwing
complete.
when you guys announced it.
Yeah. So I hope that people would see that this is good for everyone, and but yeah, I mean, we just do what is best for our clients and for the community. And I think that companies that are, let's say, they feel like they're missing something if the community is moving forward, should question their strategies, because the community is going to move forward, right? We're in a very powerful ecosystem. We're in an open source ecosystem. Nothing will hold back the community. So you have to be with the community, otherwise you would be irrelevant later. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I know you're a busy guy, so I want to let you go too. I want to just encourage the audience, like, this is the right time, like, to be able to even bring GraphQL in a meaningful way to your company. We had a couple of recent talks at other tech institutes, and GraphQL is still kind of bubbly in terms of people who know it deeply, and those that aren't really aware of it, it's just like it doesn't even go on the radar yet in a lot of cases. So big companies are embracing it, but there's like so much room and there's so much space to go in there. So having tooling like everything that's produced by the Guild, even having SaaS companies that are built around that now as well. You can go into your company with confidence, taking the things you've learned here today and say, okay, actually, this would be really great to solve our problem for X, Y, and Z, and not be worrying about you're going to be having to maintain brittle and cowboy code infrastructure for the next 100 years. You're going to be able to say, this is actually robust tooling. These are vetted by big companies. These are well-maintained libraries. And I think that's a really powerful concept. Uri, thanks so much. I always appreciate your talks. It's always great to see, and also thanks for your work you're doing in the community. And where can people find you? Uri Go, right? That's the place to get you.
Yeah, Uri Go on GitHub, I think, is the best place. And then from there's links to my Twitter. There's also my personal email. Like, we really, like I said, for free, we just help people. You can email me and contact us just with any questions, and we can sit down and look at your infrastructure. We do it for free. We enjoyed it, and feel free to really reach out in any way possible. And thanks, Jesse. It was really nice to see you again, and also great points. I'm going to take a lot of it to the team.
Well, glad I can contribute something back. So, all right. Thanks, Uri. Have a nice one, and we'll see you at the next one.